In this episode, we're going to turn the idea of studying into an actual spoken plan you can follow without guessing what to do next. A lot of beginners fail not because they are incapable of learning the material, but because their studying is scattered and changes direction every time something feels hard. A solid plan is like a map that keeps you moving forward even when motivation dips, and it also makes sure your effort matches what the exam is actually testing. The CompTIA DataAI learning objectives are basically the exam's promise about what it will measure, so aligning your plan to those objectives is the most efficient way to improve your odds. You do not need to be naturally organized to do this well, but you do need a simple routine that you can say out loud and repeat. By the end, you should be able to describe your study approach in plain language, including what you do each day, what you do each week, and how you check that you are improving. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A learning objective is not just a topic label because it describes a capability the exam expects you to demonstrate. Beginners often see objectives as a long checklist of terms, but the more useful way to view them is as a set of skills that you must be able to perform mentally under time pressure. For example, an objective might require you to interpret model performance, identify data quality problems, or choose a statistical method that fits a situation. Those are not things you learn by rereading definitions 10 times, because performance comes from practice that includes confusion and correction. When you build your plan, you want to convert objectives into actions, like explain, compare, classify, interpret, and troubleshoot. If you can say an explanation out loud in your own words, you are much closer to being able to answer a question quickly. Treat the objectives as the exam's vocabulary of tasks, not just its vocabulary of terms, and your study plan will naturally become more practical and less random. A spoken study plan is powerful because it forces you to be clear, and clarity reduces procrastination. If your plan lives only in your head, it stays vague, and vague plans are easy to abandon. When you can say your plan out loud, it becomes a script you can follow even on tired days, and tired days are the days where most people drift. Your spoken plan should fit into your real life, meaning it should be short enough to repeat and flexible enough to survive interruptions. You are building a rhythm, not a perfect schedule. A good rhythm includes a minimum daily commitment, a slightly longer weekly review, and a repeating cycle that revisits older material so it does not fade. When you hear yourself say, "Today I learn," "Today I practice," "Today I review," you stop negotiating with yourself and start doing the work. Start by dividing your study work into 3 kinds of sessions that match how learning actually sticks. The first kind is concept sessions, where you learn the meaning of a topic and build a mental picture of it. The second kind is application sessions, where you practice recognizing when that concept applies and what it implies. The third kind is recall sessions, where you prove to yourself that you can retrieve the idea without looking it up. Beginners often spend nearly all their time in concept sessions because it feels safer, but the exam rewards application and recall far more than passive exposure. If you only read, your brain gets familiar, but familiarity is not the same as readiness. A balanced plan might be mostly concept in the first week of a new topic, then mostly application and recall after that. You are not abandoning learning. You are moving from learning to using. Now connect those session types to the learning objectives by translating each objective into a simple spoken challenge. For example, if an objective involves probability, your spoken challenge might be, "I can explain the difference between a probability distribution and a single probability, and I can say what a distribution tells me about uncertainty." If an objective involves metrics, your spoken challenge might be, "I can look at a metric and describe what kind of mistake it measures and what kind of mistake it hides." If an objective involves data quality, your spoken challenge might be, "I can describe how bad data enters a pipeline and what signs show up when it does." This translation step matters because it turns the objective into something you can test without tools. If you can speak the answer, you can usually choose the correct option on a multiple-choice question. Your plan becomes a collection of tiny verbal skills, and tiny skills add up to confidence. A beginner-friendly plan also needs to respect cognitive load, which is a fancy way of saying your brain can only hold so much new material at once. The CompTIA DataAI exam covers several areas that connect, but they can feel like separate worlds at first, like statistics, model evaluation, and data handling. If you try to study all worlds in the same day, you will feel busy without feeling progress. A better approach is to pick one primary theme for a given week, and then include a small amount of review from the previous theme so connections form. That is how you avoid the common trap of studying in isolated piles that never meet. You want your plan to create overlap on purpose, because the exam often mixes concepts, like combining sampling bias with model metrics or combining probability thinking with decision thresholds. Overlap is where understanding becomes durable. To make this concrete, imagine a weekly cycle that repeats until exam day, even as the topics change. Early in the week, you introduce new objectives, focusing on understanding and simple examples. Midweek, you shift to application, where you practice interpreting situations and eliminating wrong answers. Late in the week, you focus on recall, where you speak explanations from memory and correct gaps quickly. At the end of the week, you do a short self-check that is less about how many pages you covered and more about what you can do now that you could not do before. This weekly loop is stable, so you are not reinventing your study process every week. The content changes, but the rhythm stays the same. Beginners succeed when the process is predictable, because predictability lowers the emotional cost of starting. A plan also needs a daily structure that is realistic, because the most perfect plan in the world is useless if you cannot follow it. A simple daily structure is a short warm-up review, a focused learning block, and a closing recall check. The warm-up review is where you revisit something from yesterday or last week, so your brain is reminded that older material still matters. The learning block is where you engage with a new objective or deepen a current one, using your own words to restate it and connect it to what you already know. The closing recall check is where you test yourself without notes, even if you feel unready, because that feeling is part of learning. If you miss something, you do not punish yourself, you just mark it as a target for tomorrow's warm-up. This daily loop makes progress measurable and removes the stress of wondering whether you studied the right way. When you align to learning objectives, you also want to track coverage without turning your plan into a spreadsheet obsession. Coverage means you have encountered each objective, but mastery means you can handle it in different question forms. A beginner often thinks, "I studied that," meaning they read it once, but the exam asks, "Can you recognize it, apply it, and interpret it under pressure?" So your plan should include multiple passes through the objectives, with each pass having a different goal. The first pass is recognition, where you know what the words mean. The second pass is explanation, where you can teach it simply out loud. The third pass is discrimination, where you can tell it apart from similar ideas. The fourth pass is integration, where you can connect it to other objectives and handle mixed scenarios. If you expect multiple passes, you stop feeling behind when you revisit a topic, because revisiting is the plan, not a sign of failure. Another key part of matching objectives is deciding what depth is needed for a certification exam, which is different from a graduate-level course. You do not need to memorize every formula or prove every theorem, but you do need to know what each concept is for, what assumptions it depends on, and what goes wrong when those assumptions are violated. For example, you may not need to compute a complex statistical value by hand, but you should know what it means when a test result is significant or not significant. You may not need to implement a machine learning model, but you should know what a metric implies about errors and trade-offs. Depth on this exam is often about interpretation and decision-making, not long calculations. A good spoken plan includes a rule for depth, like, "I will learn enough to explain the concept, predict its behavior, and choose between alternatives." If you cannot do those three things, you are not done with that objective yet. Your plan should also include a strategy for weak areas that does not destroy your motivation. Beginners often react to weakness by avoiding it or by drowning in it, and both reactions are inefficient. A better strategy is to keep weak objectives in a small, rotating focus list. Each day you address one weak objective for a short time, focusing on one specific misunderstanding rather than the whole topic. This is where speaking helps, because you can identify exactly where your explanation breaks down. Maybe you can define a term, but you cannot explain why it matters, or maybe you understand the big idea, but you confuse two similar metrics. The plan is to repair one crack at a time, and then return the objective to the normal cycle. This approach keeps weakness from becoming scary, because it becomes routine maintenance instead of a judgment about your intelligence. It also helps to build checkpoints into your plan that match the exam experience, because learning can feel good even when performance is still shaky. A checkpoint is a short moment where you test your ability to answer questions the way the exam asks them, using time limits and careful reading. Early checkpoints should be low pressure, focused on one topic area, and designed to teach you how questions are written. Later checkpoints should mix objectives, because the exam will not politely separate topics for you. Your spoken plan should include when checkpoints happen, like once per week or once every 2 weeks, and what you do with the results. The results are not a grade. They are data about which objectives need another pass. If you treat checkpoints as data collection, you stop fearing them and you start using them to steer your next week's focus. That is exactly how a good learning system adapts. Since this is an audio-first approach, you also want to practice learning in a way that fits listening and speaking, not just reading. That means you should regularly explain concepts out loud as if you were teaching them to a friend who is curious but new. When you do that, you discover whether you actually understand the concept or you only recognize the words. If you stumble, you have found a gap, and gaps are valuable because they tell you what to fix. Another audio-friendly habit is to create short verbal summaries at the end of a study session, like a 30-second recap of what you learned and why it matters. Over time, these recaps become a library of explanations in your own voice. When exam day arrives, your brain will be used to retrieving explanations quickly because you have been doing it all along. Retrieval is the real skill behind confident answering. Finally, make sure your plan includes a simple way to stay consistent without relying on motivation. Motivation is unreliable, especially when you are new and everything feels hard at first. Consistency comes from making the first step small enough that you will do it even on a busy day. Your spoken plan should include a minimum session that counts as success, like a short review and one spoken explanation, and then an ideal session that you do when you have time. This prevents the all-or-nothing thinking that causes people to quit after missing a day. You are training for a professional exam, and professionals build habits that survive imperfect weeks. Consistency also builds confidence, because each completed session is evidence that you can keep going. When you align your routine with the CompTIA DataAI learning objectives, and you repeat that routine steadily, you are not just learning content, you are building exam readiness as a skill. By now, you should be able to say your plan out loud in a way that sounds practical and repeatable, not like a motivational poster. You know that the learning objectives describe what you must be able to do, and you know how to turn those objectives into spoken challenges that you can practice without tools. You have a rhythm that includes concept learning, application practice, and recall, because the exam cares most about what you can retrieve and apply under pressure. You also have a way to revisit objectives through multiple passes, because mastery is built by returning with new goals, not by trying to finish everything in one sitting. Most importantly, you have a plan that adapts, using checkpoints and weak area rotation instead of panic and avoidance. If you can stick to that plan, your studying becomes calmer, your progress becomes visible, and every future topic becomes easier to absorb because you have a reliable system guiding the work.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.